a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. The Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals was an American immigration policy that allowed some individuals who entered the country as minors, and had either entered or remained in the country illegally, to receive a renewable 2-year period of deferred action from deportation and to be eligible for a work permit. As of 2017, approximately 800,000 individuals were enrolled in the program created by DACA. The policy was established by the Obama administration in June 2012 and plans to begin phasing it out were initiated by the Trump administration in September 2017. The policy was established by executive action rather than legislation. However, participating individuals are still commonly referred to as Dreamers after the DREAM Act, a bipartisan bill first proposed in 2001 that was the first of a number of subsequent efforts in the U.S. House and Senate to provide an opportunity for certain illegal immigrants who were brought to the U.S. as children to attend college and eventually become permanent citizens of the United States. The key difference being that DACA provides no such path to citizenship. In November 2014, President Barack Obama announced his intention to expand DACA to cover additional illegal immigrants, although multiple states immediately sued to prevent the expansion, which was ultimately blocked by the courts. The United States Department of Homeland Security rescinded the expansion on June 16, 2017, while continuing to review the existence of the DACA program as a whole. Plans to phase out DACA were initiated by the Trump administration on September 5, 2017, allowing Congress 6 months to pass the DREAM Act, which would provide the path to citizenship for Dreamers under DACA that Congress had originally intended. Research has shown that DACA increased the wages and labor force participation of DACA-eligible immigrants and reduced the number of unauthorized immigrant households living in poverty. Studies have also shown that DACA increased the mental health outcomes for DACA-eligible immigrants and their children. There are no known major adverse impacts from DACA on native-born workers' employment, and most economists say that DACA benefits the U.S. economy. To be eligible for the program, recipients may not have felonies or serious misdemeanors on their records. There is no evidence that individuals covered by DACA are more likely to commit crimes than the general population of the United States. Background: the policy was created after acknowledgement that Dreamer students had been largely raised in the United States, and this was seen as a way to remove immigration enforcement attention from low-priority individuals with good behavior. Dreamers get their name from the DREAM Act, a bill that aimed to grant legal status to young immigrants brought here illegally by their parents. The illegal immigrant student population was rapidly increasing. Approximately 65,000 illegal immigrant students graduate from U.S. high schools on a yearly basis. The vast majority of Dreamers are from Mexico. The DREAM Act bill, which would have provided a pathway to permanent residency for unauthorized immigrants brought to the United States upon meeting certain qualifications, was considered by Congress in 2007. It failed to overcome a bipartisan filibuster in the Senate. It was considered again in 2011. The bill passed the House, but did not get the 60 votes needed to overcome a Republican filibuster in the Senate. In 2013, legislation had comprehensively reformed the immigration system, including allowing Dreamers permission to stay in the country, work, and attend school. This passed the Senate, but it was not brought up for a vote in the House. The New York Times credits the failure of Congress to pass the DREAM Act bill as the driver behind Obama's decision to sign DACA. Establishment: President Barack Obama announced this policy with a speech in the Rose Garden of the White House on June 15, 2012. The date was chosen as the 30th anniversary of Plila v. Doe, a Supreme Court decision barring public schools from charging illegal immigrant children tuition. The policy was officially established by a memorandum from the Secretary of Homeland Security titled, "Exercising Prosecutorial Discretion with Respect to Individuals Who Came to the United States as Children." This policy allowed certain immigrants to escape deportation and obtain work permits for a period of 2 years renewable upon good behavior. To apply, immigrants had to be younger than 31 on June 15, 2012. must have come to the U.S. when they were younger than 16, and must have lived in the U.S. since 2007. In August 2012, the Pew Research Center estimated that up to 1.7 million people were eligible. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services began accepting applications for the program on August 15, 2012. USCIS had received 844,931 initial applications for DACA status, of which 741,546 were approved, 60,269 were denied, and 43,121 were pending. Over half of those accepted reside in California and Texas. According to an August 2017 survey, most current registrants are in their 20s, and about 80% arrived in the United States when they were 10 or younger. In November 2014, Obama announced his intention to expand DACA to make more people eligible. However, in December 2014, Texas and 25 other states, all with Republican governors, sued the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Texas, asking the court to enjoin implementation of both the DACA expansion and Deferred Action for parents of Americans. In February 2015, Judge Andrew S. Hannon issued a preliminary injunction blocking the expansion from going into effect while the case, Texas v. United States, proceeds. After progressing through the court system, an equally divided Supreme Court left the injunction in place, without setting any precedent. Reaction: Republican Party leaders denounced the DACA program as an abuse of executive power. Nearly all Republicans in the House of Representatives voted 224-201 to defund DACA in June 2013. Lead author of the amendment, Rep. Steve King, stated, "The point here is the president does not have the authority to waive immigration law, nor does he have the authority to create it out of thin air, and he's done both with these Morton memos in this respect. However, in practice Congress does not have the ability to defund DACA since the program is almost entirely funded by its own application fees rather than congressional appropriations." Implementation: DACA was formally initiated by a policy memorandum sent from Secretary of Homeland Security Janet Napolitano to the heads of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The memo formally directed them to exercise their enforcement discretion on behalf of individuals who met the requirements. To apply for DACA, eligible individuals must pay a $495 application fee, submit several forms, and produce documents showing they meet the requirements. They do not need legal representation. Eligibility: to be eligible, recipients must have entered the United States before their 16th birthday and prior to June 2007, be currently in school, a high school graduate, or be honorably discharged from the military, be under the age of 31 as of June 15, 2012, and not have been convicted of a felony, significant misdemeanor or 3 other misdemeanors, or otherwise pose a threat to national security. The program does not currently provide permanent lawful status or a path to citizenship, nor does it provide eligibility for federal welfare or student aid. In August 2012, the Migration Policy Institute estimated that as many as 1.76 million people could be eligible for DACA. Of those, 28% were under 15 and would have to wait until reaching that age to apply. In addition, roughly 20% did not meet any of the education criteria, but could become eligible by enrolling in a program before submitting their application. 74% of the eligible population was born in Mexico or Central America. Smaller proportions came from Caribbean and South America, Asia, and the rest of the world. To qualify for DACA, applicants must meet the following major requirements, although meeting them does not guarantee approval. To show proof of qualification, applicants must submit 3 forms. I-821D, Consideration of Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. I-765, Application for Employment Authorization. And I-765WS, Worksheet, as well as supporting documentation. Travel eligibility. In addition to the $495 application fee, if a DACA qualifying immigrant wants to travel abroad, there is an additional fee and application requirement. Form I-131 application type D, with a fee of $575 needs to be submitted to USCIS. Form I-131 must also be submitted by anyone that applies for a green card or other residency option regardless of how they arrived upon U.S. soil. To receive advance parole, one must travel abroad for an educational, employment, or humanitarian purpose. This must be indicated on the Form I-131 as described below. Travel for leisure is not a valid purpose. Expansion. In November 2014, U.S. President Barack Obama announced changes to DACA which would expand it to include illegal immigrants who entered the country prior to 2010, eliminate the requirement that applicants be younger than 31 years old, and lengthen the renewable deferral period to 2 years. The Pew Research Center estimated that this would increase the number of eligible people by about 330,000. However, in December 2014, Texas and 25 other states, all with Republican governors, sued in the district court for the Southern District of Texas, asking the court to enjoin implementation of both the DACA expansion and deferred action for parents of Americans. In February 2015, Judge Andrew S. Hannon issued a preliminary injunction blocking the expansion from going into effect while the case, Texas v. United States, proceeds. After progressing through the court system, the appeals court ruled 2-1 in favor of enjoining the DACA expansion. When the Obama administration appealed to the Supreme Court, Justice Antonin Scalia's untimely death left an 8-justice court, which then ruled equally divided for and against the injunction. Procedural rules of the court in the case of a tie would mean that no opinion would be written, no precedent would be set by the Supreme Court in the case, and that the appellate court's ruling would stand. The court's temporary injunction does not affect the existing DACA. Individuals may continue to come forward and request an initial grant of DACA, or renewal of DACA under the guidelines established in 2012. Crime. According to factcheck.org, there is no evidence that DACA holders are more likely to commit crimes than U.S. citizens. Factcheck.org noted that numerous studies have found that immigrants do not commit crimes at a higher rate than non-immigrants. Economy. Fact-checkers note that, on a large scale or in the long run, there is no reason to believe that DACA recipients have a major deleterious effect on American workers' employment chances. To the contrary, some economists say that DACA benefits the overall U.S. economy. Economists have warned that ending DACA could adversely affect the U.S. economy, and that most economists see immigration generally as an economic boon. Almost all economists reject Jeff Sessions' claim that DACA denied jobs to hundreds of thousands of Americans by allowing those same jobs to go to illegal aliens. Sessions' claim is rooted in what economists call the lump of labor fallacy. A 2016 study in the Journal of Public Economics found that DACA increased labor force participation and decreased the unemployment rate for DACA-eligible immigrants. DACA also increased the income of illegal immigrants in the bottom of the income distribution. The study estimates that DACA moved 50,000 to 75,000 unauthorized immigrants into employment. According to University of California, Davis economist Giovanni Piri, DACA consequently increases consumption and overall demand for U.S. services, products, and jobs where the DACA recipients live and spend. Economists have shown that highly skilled workers increase local productivity and create opportunities for the other workers too. A 2016 study in Economics Letters found that DACA-eligible households were 38% less likely than non-eligible unauthorized immigrant households to live in poverty. Furthermore, DACA-eligible workers tend to have higher skilled, higher-paying jobs than undocumented immigrants. According to Giovanni Piri, ending DACA would bring a net loss in productivity, given that, as of 2017, the U.S. economy is close to full employment. Ike Brannon and Logan Albright of the Cato Institute wrote in a 2017 that ending DACA would have an adverse economic and fiscal impact, estimating that the cost of immediately eliminating DACA and deporting those who received deferred action would be $283 billion over a decade, and $7.5 billion in deportation costs. Brannon and Albright wrote that their projections were a conservative estimate due to the fact that many DACA immigrants are young and still acquiring education credentials that will boost wages later. The Immigrant Legal Resource Center estimated that deporting DACA-eligible individuals would reduce Social Security and Medicare tax revenue by $24.6 billion over a decade. Peary argues that DACA recipients likely have a significant net positive fiscal impact given that DACA-eligible individuals have similar characteristics as second-generation immigrants, and that research shows that second-generation immigrants have a net positive fiscal impact of $173,000 to $259,000 per immigrant. Peary also notes that the U.S. public school system has already invested in educating these individuals, and they are at the point at which they can start contributing to the U.S. economy and public coffers. Deporting them, or increasing the likelihood that they be deported, is economically counterproductive. A 2017 study by the Center for American Progress estimated that the loss of all DACA-eligible workers would reduce U.S. GDP by $433 billion over the next 10 years, according to Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas economist Pierre Orenius. Due to their risk of deportation, it is likely that previously DACA-protected individuals will slip into the shadow economy or take low-profile jobs that pay less. A 2018 National Bureau of Economic Research paper found that DACA likely led to greater productivity by increasing the college attendance and employment of DACA-eligible individuals. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?